The water lapped gently against the hull as Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida gripped his pen on that April morning in 1945. His hand moved across the pages of his private journal with careful deliberation, each word a small act of rebellion. The radar scope had shown him something that contradicted everything his training had taught him, and the knowledge pressed down on him like a physical weight. What Admiral Toyoda promised us simply cannot be true. The massive vessel cutting through the waters of the East China Sea, the Yamato, was about to encounter an enemy it could never hope to match. Through the electronic glow of the radar display, Yoshida watched hundreds of aircraft signatures appearing like a spreading stain across the screen. They approached from every direction, closing at speeds that made escape impossible. No battleship, regardless of how heavily armored or powerfully armed, could fight what was coming. In the planning offices back in Tokyo, the battleship represented the ultimate expression of naval power. But out here in these open waters, far from the safety of Japanese harbors, a new chapter in military history was about to unfold. The age of the battleship was ending, not with triumph, but with devastation. More than 3,000 men had boarded the Yamato that morning. They lined the decks, moved through the endless corridors of steel, manned their stations in the depths below. Not one of them grasped the true nature of their mission, that they were participating in what would become history's final great battleship offensive, a venture born from desperation that would conclude not in honorable ship-to-ship combat, but in a tragic one-sided aerial onslaught. The calculation determining this battle's outcome had nothing to do with belt thickness or gun caliber. The mathematics was brutally simple, though Japan's military commanders had refused to acknowledge it for years. A single battleship, no matter its firepower, stood no chance against nearly 400 aircraft, executing coordinated strikes with absolute control of the sky. From confidence to catastrophe would occupy less than 2 hours. The story of this moment had begun years before in the drafting halls of the Kura Naval Arsenal. Through the mid-1930s, Japanese naval engineers had pursued a singular vision with almost religious fervor. If they could not compete with American shipbuilding numbers, they would create individual vessels of such devastating capability that one Japanese battleship could overcome 2 or 3 American ones. Captain Kikuya Fujimoto, the visionary and somewhat contentious designer who had envisioned the Yamato class, presented his radical proposal to the Naval Command in the spring of 1934. The specifications alone were staggering: a battleship weighing 70,000 tons, mounting 9 massive 18.1-inch guns with armor plating reaching 16 inches thick around the hull. The measurements shattered every international naval treaty and surpassed anything attempted by any other nation. The work commenced in late 1937 at Kure, shrouded in extraordinary secrecy. Every worker who entered the shipyard signed binding agreements pledging silence, with imprisonment awaiting those who spoke. The residential areas surrounding the construction zone had their windows sealed shut with boards. Elaborate palm frond screens and tall fencing enclosed the entire project. When the Yamato's sister ship, the Musashi, slid into the water from Nagasaki's yards in November 1940, the entire city was placed under air raid restrictions. Citizens were confined indoors. Not a single civilian would catch a glimpse of the vessel. The security measures proved effective. American intelligence analysts only discovered the Yamato's true specifications after the war concluded. Yamato officially entered service on December 16, 1941, just over a week after the Pearl Harbor assault. The vessel stretched 263 meters in length with a beam measurement of 38.9 meters. Her full displacement of nearly 72,000 tons made her the heaviest battleship ever to take to the sea. The main weapons, 9 Type 94 naval guns firing 18.1-inch rounds, represented the zenith of naval gunnery technology. Each barrel measured 21.13 meters in length and weighed 147.3 metric tons. These formidable weapons could hurl a 1,460-kilogram armor-piercing projectile across 42 kilometers of ocean. When all 9 guns discharged simultaneously, over 13,000 kilograms of steel thundered toward the target. The protective armor was extraordinary. The main belt extended 16.1 inches thick, angled deliberately at 20 degrees to enhance deflection. Deck armor ranged from 7.9 inches across the machinery compartments to 9 inches over the ammunition magazines. The turrets mounting the main batteries boasted faceplates of 25.6 inches, the most substantial armor ever attached to a warship's fighting compartments. Beneath the waterline lay an intricate network of compartments designed to absorb torpedo strikes. Multiple bulkheads could be flooded strategically or maintained empty to dissipate explosion forces. The designers claimed this system could withstand 3 torpedo hits on a single side. That claim would face its ultimate test on April 7th. Secondary weapons originally included 12 155mm guns, housed in 4 triple turrets, and 12 dual-purpose 127mm guns in 6 twin mounts. For protection against air attacks, the ship carried only 24 25mm guns, a tragically insufficient number that reflected the naval staff's catastrophic underestimation of aerial combat. That miscalculation would prove devastating. The Yamato's engines consisted of 12 boilers, feeding 4 steam turbines that developed 150,000 shaft horsepower. This tremendous power plant drove the enormous hull to speeds exceeding 27 knots during trials, remarkably swift for a vessel of such immense tonnage. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the officer who had conceived the Pearl Harbor operation and commanded the combined fleet, selected the Yamato as his flagship on February 12, 1942. Yamamoto possessed a sophisticated understanding of naval aviation that surpassed most officers in the Imperial Navy. He had actually opposed building the Yamato class, believing the industrial resources would serve better producing aircraft carriers instead. Yet even Yamamoto could not resist the prestige of commanding from history's mightiest battleship. The Yamato's debut in combat arrived in May 1942 during the Midway engagement. Yamamoto embarked aboard the battleship as part of the main battle force, positioning his fleet 300 miles behind the carrier strike group. The tactical concept depended upon the carriers striking Midway and drawing the American carrier force into range of his battleship's guns. The strategy disintegrated catastrophically. American carrier pilots found and destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers in a single day's fighting. The Yamato never discharged a single shot. She turned homeward without firing upon any American vessel. This pattern persisted throughout the Yamato's service. Despite possessing guns capable of destroying any warship on the planet from ranges where the enemy could not respond, the Yamato spent most of the war sheltering in harbor anchorages. Fuel reserves were too precious to expend, and the ship's strategic value seemed too great to risk where American air superiority dominated. From mid-1942 through the summer of 1944, the Yamato remained berthed at Truk Lagoon in the Carolines, primarily serving as a command ship and living quarters. Officers lectured the crew on naval tactics. Men conducted routine training drills. Everyone waited for a decisive engagement that would never materialize. By late 1943, as American island-hopping campaigns swept across the Central Pacific, Japan's strategic position had deteriorated beyond recovery. The Imperial Navy had suffered catastrophic losses of destroyers, cruisers, and carriers in the Solomon Islands, fighting in the Philippine Sea Battle. Oil shortages had grown critical as American submarines systematically strangled the flow of petroleum from the Dutch East Indies. The Yamato returned to Japanese waters in December 1943 for extensive reconstruction. Shipyard workers removed 2 of the 4 triple 155mm secondary turrets, replacing them with enhanced anti-aircraft batteries. The light anti-aircraft capacity jumped from 24 25mm guns to 52. Radar arrays were fitted throughout. When the Yamato emerged from Kure in March 1944, she possessed better balanced armament. Though the strategic moment for battleship dominance had already slipped away forever, the sole instance when the Yamato's main guns engaged enemy warships occurred in October 1944 during the Leyte Gulf action. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita led a surface force including the Yamato and her sister ship Musashi through the San Bernardino Strait, seeking to assault American landing operations at Leyte. During the Sibian Sea fighting on October 24th, American pilots subjected the Musashi to successive waves of attacks spanning 4 hours. The battleship absorbed an estimated 17 bomb impacts and 19 torpedo strikes before capsizing and disappearing beneath the surface, taking over 1,000 sailors with her. From 30 miles away, the Yamato witnessed her sister's destruction. The lesson was unmistakable and horrifying. Armor plating, regardless of thickness, could not shield a battleship from coordinated aerial bombardment. At 6:57 on the morning of October 25, 1944, the Yamato opened fire against American ships for the first and final time in her operational existence. The distance measured 35,000 yards. 6 American escort carriers with minimal defensive ships formed the target. These vessels constituted Taffy 3, providing air cover for troops ashore at Leyte. Throughout nearly 2 hours, the Yamato chased the fleeing American formation, salvo after salvo erupting from her massive guns. Direct hits struck the escort carrier USS White Plains, the impact explosion occurring directly beneath the keel and inflicting severe structural damage. The Yamato contributed to the destruction of the escort carrier USS Gambier Bay and the destroyers USS Johnston and USS Hull. Yet in this apparent moment of success, the fundamental weakness of battleship tactics became evident. American destroyer captains drove their ships straight toward the Japanese battleships in charges that should have been futile suicide runs. Their fearless aggression altered the battle's outcome. Kurita, growing concerned about possible submarine presence and mistakenly believing he faced fleet carriers rather than escort carriers, commanded an immediate withdrawal just as his battleships approached the American beachhead. As the Yamato departed combat waters, American carrier planes from the main fleet intercepted the Japanese formation. Bombs damaged the Yamato's weather deck and killed numerous crew members. By autumn 1944, Japan faced an utterly hopeless situation. American forces controlled the Pacific Central region, were recapturing Philippine territory, and were preparing assaults on islands within striking distance of the Japanese homeland itself. The Imperial Navy's combined fleet had been essentially eliminated. The Yamato returned to Japan in November 1944, entering dry dock at Kure for extensive repairs. On November 25, while traversing the East China Sea, the Yamato's task force encountered the American submarine USS Archerfish. The submarine destroyed the battleship Congo and a destroyer escort. The Yamato escaped without damage. Repairs and upgraded anti-aircraft systems consumed the remainder of 1944. Workers added more 25mm anti-aircraft guns until the total reached 162. Additional radar systems were installed and damage control capabilities improved. When the Yamato departed dry dock on January 3, 1945, she possessed every defensive modification possible for modern Pacific warfare. Yet modifications could not alter the fundamental reality. Fuel supplies for extended operations no longer existed. Air support was non-existent. The strategic rationale for battleships had vanished from modern warfare. Captain Kusaku Aruga assumed command of the Yamato on November 25, 1944. He possessed extensive background in both cruiser and battleship operations, drawing on years of naval service. March of 1945 brought American operations toward Okinawa. That island lay barely 350 miles south of Japan proper. Its capture would grant American forces airfields and harbor facilities for launching the invasion of the Japanese homeland itself. On March 19th, Task Force 58 carrier aircraft struck the Kure naval base in a devastating assault. Hundreds of attacking planes descended on Japanese warships anchored there. A bomb struck the Yamato's bridge structure, and shockwaves from near misses caused additional damage. 5 crew members perished, and dozens more suffered injuries. American forces landed on Okinawa on April 1, 1945. The invasion encountered minimal opposition as Japanese defenders retreated into the island's mountainous terrain and prepared defensive fortifications. Tokyo military conferences in March 1945 briefed Emperor Hirohito on defensive preparations for Okinawa. Army representatives detailed their extensive ground fortifications and plans for massive kamikaze operations. The emperor posed a question that would determine the Yamato's future. But what of the Navy? What role does the Navy play in defending Okinawa? Do we possess no remaining vessels? The Navy's command structure, already humiliated by countless defeats and their failure to prevent American forces from approaching Japan itself, felt obligated to demonstrate that naval strength still existed, that fighting determination remained. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, heading the combined fleet, instructed his planning staff to devise an operation utilizing the Navy's remaining warships. The resulting operation received the name Tengo, Operation Heaven No. 1. The Yamato, alongside the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers, would depart from the inland sea, cross the East China Sea, and assault American positions at Okinawa. The task force would breach American naval defenses, drive toward Okinawa's coastline, and employ their guns as stationary coastal batteries until destruction. Any crew members surviving the battle would land ashore to fight with the army garrison until killed. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, commanding the Second Fleet, received this plan's presentation on April 5th. Admiral Ito's response was nothing short of explosive. He declared the whole operation meaningless, nothing more than throwing away good ships and brave men for a result that would amount to little beyond some headlines in the papers. His critique was sharp and pointed directly at the fundamental weaknesses in the plan. The fleet would operate without air protection once the initial hours passed. American submarines prowling beneath the surface would pick them up without difficulty. Reconnaissance planes from American carriers would spot them long before they drew anywhere near Okinawa, and then the full weight of American naval aviation would come down upon them. Beyond that, the ships didn't even carry enough fuel to make the return journey home to Japan. Ito flatly refused to authorize the mission at first. The disagreement stretched through the darkness and into the early morning hours of April 5th. Officers dispatched from Tokyo headquarters made their position clear. This order came from the very top, from those who held ultimate authority. Ito gave way eventually, though not without making his feelings known. He was reported to have said this operation would accomplish nothing but adding more names to the casualty rolls. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on April 6th, Yamato steamed away from the Tokuyama oil depot for what would turn out to be the final time. The ship had been loaded with just enough fuel for a one-way journey to Okinawa. Yahagi, a cruiser, sailed alongside with 8 destroyers in escort. Roughly 3,000 Japanese sailors made up the entire striking force. Just before setting sail, crews were gathered on deck and told exactly what lay ahead. Each man was given the choice. Those who wished to step back and remain ashore could do so, and no shame would follow. Some younger officer candidates, along with sailors who were sick or too badly injured to fight effectively, were ordered to transfer to other vessels. The Navy wanted to keep trained personnel alive wherever possible. The task force moved through the Bungo Strait that separates Kyushu from Shikoku shortly past midnight on April 7th. American submarines USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback were positioned and ready, stationed exactly where intelligence officers had predicted they would need to be. Days earlier, American codebreakers had already deciphered the details of Operation 10 Go and knew it was coming. Throughout the darkness, the submarines shadowed the Japanese formation, constantly transmitting position reports back to American command. The Japanese were aware they had been spotted, radar confirmed the submarine presence, but there was nothing they could do to shake these unseen pursuers. When daylight finally broke across the waters on April 7th, the Japanese force passed the Asumi Peninsula and broke out into the vast openness of the East China Sea. They arranged themselves into a tight defensive formation. Yahagi took the forward position. Yamato occupied the center of the ring. 8 destroyers fanned out around them, each maintaining roughly 1,500 meters distance from the next. The speed increased to 20 knots. Just after 6 in the morning, 6 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters appeared overhead to serve as combat air patrol. This small handful represented every bit of air cover the Japanese could provide. The pilots understood their orders clearly: stay until 10 o'clock in the morning, then return to base and leave. After that point, Yamato and her companions would face whatever American air power threw at them completely alone. The sky above was grey and heavy with cloud cover hanging down at around 3,000 feet. Rain squalls came and went unpredictably. One moment visibility stretched for miles. The next, rain and mist, reduced sight to almost nothing. An F-6F Hellcat pilot from USS Essex caught the first glimpse of the Japanese force through a gap in the clouds at 8:23 in the morning. The unmistakable profile of Yamato showed itself for just long enough. Within minutes, the pilot's report reached Task Force 58 and Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell, who commanded from his flagship USS Bunker Hill. Task Force 58 represented an enormous concentration of naval power. 16 aircraft carriers, 8 fast battleships, 15 cruisers, and more than 60 destroyers all served under Mitchell's command. The air complement alone exceeded 1,000 aircraft. Mitchell had been anticipating this moment. American intelligence specialists had broken the Japanese codes months earlier and knew about Operation 10 go well in advance. When confirmation came that Yamato had sailed, Mitchell wasted no time. He began organizing an enormous airstrike that would dwarf anything the Japanese had experienced. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the entire Fifth Fleet, initially ordered his battleship contingent under Rear Admiral Morton Dio to move into position for a surface engagement. 6 modern battleships, including USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin, began steering to intercept. But Mitchell made his move first. He launched his aircraft without waiting for final permission from Spruance. Mitchell understood that carrier planes could eliminate Yamato far more effectively than big guns at sea, and with much less risk to his own forces. Spruance accepted the decision without argument. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Task Groups 58.1 and 58.3 began launching waves of planes. 8 carriers, USS Hornet, USS Bennington, USS Belleau Wood, USS San Jacinto, USS Essex, USS Bunker Hill, USS Hancock, and USS Bataan, sent up a total of 280 aircraft in that first strike. 132 F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs made up the fighter component. 50 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers came next. 98 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers completed the package. 53 aircraft from USS Hancock launched 15 minutes later than the others and couldn't locate the Japanese formation through the bad weather, which reduced the first actual wave to 227 aircraft making contact. Task Group 58.4 got their second wave airborne 45 minutes after the first one had launched. 110 additional aircraft from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley. Roughly 386 American planes participated in the operation overall, though navigation problems in the poor weather meant only around 280 of them actually reached the target. Each Avenger carried a Mark 13 torpedo fitted with a 600-pound warhead filled with Torpex explosive. The Helldivers packed either 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs or 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs, along with 2,250-pound bombs. The fighters added bombs or rockets to their machine guns and cannons for additional firepower. At 10 and 14 minutes past the hour, Yamato's radar picked up the American reconnaissance aircraft making their approach. The 6 Japanese Zero fighters tried to intercept, but the numbers were against them completely. They managed to shoot down none of the American planes before withdrawing at exactly 10 o'clock, as they had been instructed to do. After that hour passed, Yamato and her escort ships confronted the American air assault with no fighter protection whatsoever. By 11 o'clock, American planes were circling the Japanese formation beyond the range of anti-aircraft fire. Pilots from the various carriers worked together with practiced coordination, organizing themselves into specialized strike groups, each one tasked with hitting particular targets. Their movements showed the professional competence that came from 3 years of continuous combat experience in the Pacific. Just after 12:30, lookouts on Yamato's bridge shouted out their warning. Captain Hara commanding Yahagi would later describe the sight as utterly horrifying. Wave upon wave of American fighters and bombers circled round and round, some moving clockwise, others counterclockwise, like a pack of predators circling helpless prey. At 12:34, Yamato's main guns fired. The forward turrets unleashed their enormous armament. The battleship was firing special anti-aircraft rounds that carried time-fused explosive charges designed to burst in mid-air and scatter shrapnel like shotgun pellets across wide areas. Using 18-inch naval guns against aircraft was born of desperation. The massive shells proved utterly useless against fast-moving planes. American aviators simply flew straight through the smoke and explosions without trouble. At 12:37, the attack began in earnest. Dive bombers fell out of the clouds, pulling hard on their control sticks at the final second before releasing their bombs downward. Torpedo bombers skimmed just above the water surface, approaching from multiple angles simultaneously. Fighter planes raked the decks with machine gun fire, cutting down anti-aircraft crews caught in the open. The roar was absolutely deafening. 162 anti-aircraft guns on Yamato fired continuously without pause. The combined noise, the thunder of the main battery guns firing their anti-aircraft shells, the crack of bombs detonating, the shriek of diving aircraft, the desperate voices of damage control teams, became almost unbearable. At 12:41, 2 bombs struck Yamato's weather deck. The impact destroyed 2 triple-mounted 25mm anti-aircraft guns and their crews. The explosion tore holes in the deck surface but didn't punch through to the critical machinery spaces beneath. At 12:45, a torpedo slammed into Yamato's forward section on the port side. The underwater detonation sent violent shock waves racing through the entire structure. Water poured into the forward compartments, though the sealed doors held and prevented the flooding from spreading. Seconds later, at 12:46, 2 more bombs crashed down near the aft turret. One of them struck directly on top of the armored turret roof, pierced through it, and detonated inside. The blast killed virtually everyone working in that turret. Only a single sailor emerged alive from that position. Between 12:48 and 12:50, 2 or 3 more torpedoes found their mark on Yamato's port side. The hits occurred right at the engine room and boiler room areas. Flooding intensified dramatically. Officers immediately began counter-flooding compartments on the opposite side to keep the ship from rolling over. The first assault lasted roughly 18 minutes. As American planes pulled back and headed for their carriers, damage control officers made their reports to Captain Aruga. Yamato had absorbed at least 5 torpedo hits and 4 bomb strikes. The flooding was severe, but still manageable. The battleship continued moving forward at 20 knots. The anti-aircraft guns had suffered losses, but many remained operational. Everything changed at 1:02 when radar operators saw the second wave on their screens, closing in. This second strike consisted of 50 planes from USS Essex and USS Bataan. At 1:22 in the afternoon, a corsair from Essex planted a 1,000-pound bomb on Yamato's port bow. Helldiver pilots followed up, adding their own hits around the bridge area. 5 of the Helldivers took anti-aircraft fire themselves, which showed Yamato's defensive systems were still very much a threat. Between 1:25 and 1:30, 3 or 4 torpedoes struck Yamato along her port side in the middle section. All the torpedo pilots had been instructed to concentrate their fire on the port side to speed the ship's inevitable capsizing. The concentrated damage proved devastatingly effective. Water rushed into the boiler rooms and engine spaces along the port side. The ship's tilt to port grew steeper, now beyond 10 degrees. Counter-flooding from the starboard side temporarily corrected this angle, but the damage control center now reported something terrible. They would have to flood the starboard engine room itself to prevent the ship from flipping completely over. Captain Aruga faced an impossible choice. Flooding that compartment would temporarily save the ship by correcting the list, but it would also seal the fate of 300 men working down there. There was no time to bring them topside. Orders went out and the valves opened. Seawater poured in with tremendous force, drowning 300 sailors at their stations. At 1:33, the third wave appeared. 110 aircraft from USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, and USS Langley descended on the target. Yamato was already badly crippled, tilted at an angle, moving slower, an increasingly easy mark for the pilots above. Aviators would describe her later as a massive ship turning in slow, deliberate circles, leaving a trail of dark oil behind her, flames burning across multiple sections, yet still blazing away with every anti-aircraft gun that could be brought to bear. Between 1:33 and 2:02, at least 4 more torpedoes found the battleship, plus numerous additional bomb hits. Fires engulfed sections of the superstructure. The flooding had become impossible to contain. The ship continued tilting further and further to port, despite every desperate measure the damage control teams could attempt. Speed dropped to 10 knots, then to 5 knots. The ship could no longer be steered. At 2:02, Captain Aruga received word that the damage control officers had been killed and that counter-flooding could no longer hold back the approaching list. The ship was finished. Aruga gave the command for all remaining crew to evacuate immediately. Vice Admiral Ito raised a final signal using flag hoist to cancel the operation entirely and order the remaining ships to turn around and head back to Japan. Yamato's radio equipment had been destroyed, making signal flags the only communication method still available. Ito went below to his quarters. He would not survive the day. Captain Aruga bound himself to the binocle stand atop the bridge. The captain chose to meet his end aboard the vessel. At 14:07, a torpedo struck Yamato's starboard hull with tremendous force. 10 minutes later, at 14:17, 2 more torpedoes tore into the port side in rapid succession. The ship tilted dangerously, listing past 15 degrees. Warning systems shrieked throughout the vessel, signaling catastrophic damage in the forward gun magazines. The flood control pumps meant to contain the damage had failed completely. Ammunition began igniting uncontrollably within the heat. By 14:20, Yamato had rolled entirely onto her port side. More than 2,000 sailors remained trapped aboard, hundreds of them sealed below decks in compartments rapidly filling with seawater. As the massive hull rotated past vertical, water surged into the smokestack uptakes and inundated the boiler rooms below. The sudden collision of frigid ocean water against the superheated boilers triggered an enormous steam explosion that rocked the dying ship. At the same moment, uncontrolled fires consuming the forward magazine reached the main ammunition storage, igniting hundreds of tons of explosives. At 14:23, the explosion came. The detonation sent a devastating shockwave across the sea, visible and audible more than 100 miles distant. A mushroom cloud climbed 20,000 feet into the sky above the East China Sea. The blast wave struck with such violence that several American aircraft circling overhead suffered damage from the sheer force. Yamato fractured into 2 massive sections before plunging to the seafloor 340 meters below, roughly 200 miles northwest of Okinawa. Of the 3,332 men aboard, just 276 lived to see rescue. The American carrier aircraft had maintained their assault for 1 hour and 46 minutes of continuous attack. Yamato absorbed somewhere between 11 and 13 torpedo hits and between 6 and 15 bomb strikes. The Americans lost 10 aircraft and 12 aviators in the engagement. The imbalance was shocking. The light cruiser Yohagi went down alongside 4 destroyers. The remaining 4 destroyers managed to retrieve what survivors they could locate and turn toward home waters in Japan. This battle over the East China Sea proved beyond any doubt the absolute dominance of aircraft carrier power over traditional battleship forces. The loss of Yamato sent tremors through Japan's command structure. For the first time, the Japanese government publicly acknowledged that their mightiest battleship had been destroyed. Officials presented the narrative as heroic sacrifice, claiming Yamato had fought magnificently against impossible odds to shield Okinawa from invasion. The actual truth painted a far grimmer picture. Yamato had achieved nothing except adding 3,000 names to the growing list of Japan's war dead. She sank not a single American vessel. She prevented no landings on Okinawa. She never even came close enough to see the island with her own eyes. For American naval leadership, Yamato's destruction confirmed what many had already begun to understand. Warfare at sea had undergone complete transformation. Aircraft carriers, not battleships, would henceforth serve as the heart of any fleet. The tactical lessons extracted from sinking Yamato would shape American naval strategy for decades. A concentrated air assault could overwhelm and destroy any surface vessel. Multiple carrier groups working in coordination multiplied their striking power exponentially. Concentrated torpedo attacks aimed at one side of a ship hastened capsize and sinking. The men who survived Yamato carried the scars of that battle throughout their remaining years. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, the radar specialist who had recorded his thoughts in his diary on the morning of battle, managed to escape the sinking. He spent many hours in the oily, debris-filled water before a destroyer pulled him aboard. When peace came, he authored Requiem for battleship Yamato, offering readers a meticulous first-hand account of the ship's final hours. The book achieved tremendous success throughout Japan and remains the most authoritative eyewitness chronicle of the engagement ever published. Yoshida detailed the emotional weight of existing aboard a vessel destined for destruction, where every soul aboard recognized the mission was a march toward death. Yet the crew maintained discipline to the end. Sailors took their stations, carried out their assignments, and perished without surrendering to panic. American commanders conducted exhaustive examination of the battle afterward. The analysis from Task Force 58 scrutinized every detail of the action. Intelligence became clear that torpedoes proved substantially more destructive than bombs when confronting heavily armored battleships. Yamato's formidable armor had turned aside most bomb impacts, yet torpedoes penetrated below the waterline, where the hull lacked such protection. Focusing torpedo strikes against a single side of the vessel triggered overwhelming flooding and accelerated the ship's capsize. Effective coordination among dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighter aircraft multiplied combat effectiveness. Fighters and dive bombers suppressed the anti-aircraft defenses, giving torpedo bombers the window they needed to complete their runs with reduced casualties. The sheer quantity of American aircraft saturated Japanese air defenses. Yamato's anti-aircraft batteries managed only 10 confirmed kills despite unleashing thousands of shells skyward. The broader strategic meaning of Yamato's destruction extended well beyond the immediate tactical victory. Japan's willingness to expend her supreme battleship in what amounted to a sacrificial operation underscored the desperation consuming her strategic situation by April 1945. Military logic offered no reasonable hope Operation Tengo would achieve success. The mission was authorized for psychological purposes and internal political reasons, not sound military judgment. American strategists grasped this mentality and found it deeply troubling. If Japan would expend 3,300 sailors on an impossible battleship sortie, what cost would securing a foothold on Japan itself demand? The fighting on Okinawa, still underway when Yamato vanished beneath the waves, provided grim evidence of Japanese determination to resist unto death. More than 100,000 Japanese military personnel and civilians perished during the defense of Okinawa. In the decades following the war, Yamato evolved into a profound cultural symbol within Japan. The battleship embodied both the remarkable technical prowess of Japanese craftsmanship and the tragic waste inherent in Japan's larger war effort. The 1974 television anime space battleship Yamato envisioned the sunken battleship being restored and transformed into an interstellar warship capable of journeying through space to protect humanity against extraterrestrial threats. The program gained enormous popularity, creating the blueprint for future anime space opera productions. The 2005 film Yamato documented the battleship's final voyage through the experiences of multiple crew members serving aboard her. The motion picture earned more than 5 billion yen in commercial revenue. The Yamato Museum, located in Kure, opened in 2005, marking 6 decades after the ship's destruction. The facility showcases an intricate 10-meter scale reproduction of Yamato, complete with historical artifacts, photographs, and comprehensive displays chronicling the battleship's construction and operational history. The museum receives hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. Multiple undersea expeditions have traced and documented Yamato's wreck lying on the seafloor. The battleship rests in 2 primary sections, approximately 340 meters beneath the surface. Japanese law designates the wreck as a marine war grave, preventing any retrieval or disturbing of the remains. The 3,000 men who lost their lives aboard Yamato remain eternally with their vessel. Historians continue to debate Yamato's ultimate historical significance. Certain scholars celebrate her as an architectural marvel, the crowning achievement of battleship engineering. Others view her as a catastrophic misallocation of resources, an obsolete weapon completed precisely when the age of battleships was ending. Both interpretations hold validity. Yamato embodied outstanding engineering and construction quality. She featured groundbreaking design innovations and represented the pinnacle of battleship development. Yet she was already militarily outmoded before construction finished. The staggering resources consumed producing Yamato and her sister, ship Musashi, could have instead built approximately 45 destroyers or 6 large aircraft carriers. Japan required both types desperately throughout the conflict. The fuel burned by Yamato during her abbreviated operational existence could have sustained dozens of smaller combat vessels on genuine fighting missions. The 3,000 sailors who perished aboard Yamato on April 7, 1945, represented an irreplaceable loss of experienced naval personnel. Viewed through strategic calculation, Yamato consumed enormous material investment while producing negligible military benefit. Yet something genuinely remarkable resided in Yamato's existence. She represented the furthest boundary of what engineering could accomplish within battleship parameters. Her main guns held the distinction of being the largest ever fitted to any warship. The thickness of her armor exceeded anything ever installed on any ship. Her total displacement retained the battleship record, a distinction that will stand permanently because the world will never construct battleships in such quantities again. In this context, Yamato achieved a different species of immortality, not through military triumph, but as the ultimate and final expression of an entire naval tradition. The American aviators who destroyed Yamato recognized they were witnessing a historic moment. They had eliminated the heaviest battleship ever constructed. For the majority of them, however, it represented simply another mission in an extended campaign. Some pilots composed notes to loved ones documenting the engagement, recounting the immense proportions of the battleship and the ferocity of her defensive barrage. Celebration remained muted. By April 1945, American naval aviators functioned as seasoned professionals executing their responsibilities. Destroying Yamato brought satisfaction, but little surprise. They possessed the skills, the combat experience, the equipment, and the numerical advantage necessary to sink any vessel imaginable. This distinction between American tactical excellence and Japanese willingness to sacrifice personified the final year of Pacific warfare. American military operations proceeded from massive material abundance and carefully coordinated tactical doctrine. Japanese operations, starved of resources and bereft of workable military strategy, increasingly depended on suicidal assaults meant to maximize psychological effect while accomplishing minimal tactical gains. Yamato's desperate operation exemplified this trend precisely. The operation held no genuine military prospects, yet sacrifice without strategy equals waste. Yamato's 3,300 casualties did not postpone the American campaign by a single hour. Okinawa capitulated. American bombers commenced operations over the Japanese homeland, meeting no organized resistance. Within 4 months of Yamato's sinking, Japan laid down her weapons and surrendered completely. The ultimate paradox of Yamato's narrative lies in the fact that she sank while pursuing objectives that benefited American strategic interests. The Okinawa operation compelled Yamato to venture into open ocean, where American carrier forces could effectively engage her. Had Yamato remained sheltered in port, she would have posed real dangers during the invasion of Japan proper. Removing her through port bombardment would have presented genuine difficulties, yet Japan's leadership chose instead to expend the battleship in a symbolic gesture, rather than preserve her for genuine defense operations. American commanders could scarcely contain their disbelief when reconnaissance confirmed Operation Tengo was proceeding. Task Force 58 eagerly obliged by completely destroying her. Today, Yamato rests eternally on the East China Sea floor, a final resting place for 3,000 men and testament to the conclusion of the battleship age. She never experienced the great surface engagement that Japanese strategists imagined. She never vindicated the tremendous resources devoted to her construction. Yet she persists in collective memory because she embodied the extreme threshold of what engineering ingenuity could accomplish, constrained by battleship design parameters. Japanese commanders had proclaimed Yamato unsinkable, the supreme battleship ever launched, unstoppable in fleet combat. They spoke truly regarding her battleship power. But unsinkable? Nearly 400 American pilots and less than 120 minutes demonstrated how thoroughly that assertion crumbled. Yamato perished because naval combat itself had undergone fundamental change. No battleship, regardless of firepower or armor, could endure in seas where adversaries controlled the skies overhead. The battleship epoch concluded with Yamato's destruction on April 7, 1945. The aircraft carrier age commenced, and in that transition, Japan had already suffered defeat.